Hughes-Wilson, he is the Vice President of External Affairs of the Swedish Orphan Biovitrum, SOBI, where she's also the Chief Patient Access Officer. Graduated in law, her initial career was at Ernst & Young and at FPA, the Pharmaceutical Association in Europe. And today, after also an experience at Genzyme for several years, she's now with SOBI, but she has collective responsibilities, such as being the chair of the task force of the European industry on orphan drugs and rare diseases, and also being the spokesperson of industry in the EU Committee of Experts on Rare Diseases. And because of that, she's then involved also in other working groups that we will mention later on. Ad Schurman is the director of the, is the head, sorry, of the reimbursement department of CVZ, which is the National Competent Authority for Healthcare Reimbursement in the Netherlands. And Ad, with a clinical psychologist, had a career in both in a hospital and also in the public service and also in patient groups. Today, after heading the Department of Pharmacy for this National Competent Authority, now is overseeing the overall reimbursement. But he has a second responsibility. He is the chairman of the group of the payers for reimbursing medicines in Europe, which is called the MEDEV. And François Meyer is the Director of International Affairs of HAS, which is the National Health Technology Agency. And François is a medical doctor and has worked in industry first and then in the National French Medicine Agency, where he was the head of evaluation for biotherapies, for biologics, sorry. And after that, he joined the HTA, the French HTA agency, which was in charge of the evaluation, the division, responsible for all evaluation of pharmaceutical product, devices, interventional and diagnostic procedures. And he has also, like the two other panelists, a European responsibility as being one of the lead persons in the European network of HTA agencies. So I hope that's an acceptable introduction of our panelists. Okay. So now I have a first question to ask to the three of you, is that with this question, whether we go toward a European market on orphan drugs, I'd like first to ask you, what's your personal view on the situation in Europe regarding this orphan drug market and maybe the challenges that you observe? Could we start maybe with Wills? Yeah, normally you just speak into it, and the technician will...
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, that's not really a very good start. Okay. So thank you very much, Yann. I think when I look from an industry perspective, the main word that comes to mind is uncertainty. And I mean, uncertainty is now going beyond the uncertainty of the science and the inherent uncertainty caused by rarity, now also into the uncertainty of the numbers of orphan drugs that are expected. Nobody knows. There's a certain amount of fear. Also uncertainty around how much these products are going to cost, and uncertainty around the evidence that demonstrates whether these drugs actually work or not. So I think that's the first big word that comes to mind. The second trend I think we see is this debate is going increasingly into the mainstream. This is no longer what I used to refer to as Planet Orphan or a rare disease club. This is now on the BBC. This is in the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, and it's on the 6 o'clock news in the Netherlands. So this is a very public debate. We're no longer in the corner, in the shadows. So increased uncertainty and increased public scrutiny.
Thank you. Maybe I move to François Meyer to ask him, what's your perspective today on the situation?
Well, Martin previously showed what is complicated at the regulatory stage in Europe, but at the regulatory stage you go to one single agency. Then to be included in the national healthcare system, you have to go through the processes that are different and specific to every country. So of course it may seem quite complicated, and it is actually. basically, there are two different systems to simplify. There's the system that is applied, for instance, in the UK, but in many other countries, and notably in the Netherlands, where you use a cost utility approach or a cost effectiveness approach, and you generally use the quality as a parameter, and you calculate the cost per quality, and you compare it to thresholds, and you decide on the basis of a cost effectiveness or cost utility analysis. And then there are other systems, such as in France and in Germany, so it's about half the European population, where you assess the added clinical benefit, and then this assessment is made by the HTA agency and is passed to a pricing committee that will decide on the price based on a lot of criteria, and notably the added clinical benefit. And of course, a drug can have a higher price than comparators when and only when it shows some added clinical benefit. That is, of course, generally the case for orphan drugs, as you may imagine. So this is the general situation. And then you have to go through 27 or even more HTA bodies to indicate that, okay, you've got a marketing authorization indicating that you have a positive benefit-risk ratio, but now you have to convince people that these data are sufficient to indicate that there will be an improvement in the clinical status, in the health status of the patients who will receive the drug, and what will be the magnitude of this improvement in the health status as compared to the current therapies. And so it's difficult. It raises question, the fact that this assessment is made 27 times by 27 different bodies across Europe. And for that reason, there has been a lot of cooperation that has been ongoing. It doesn't mean that there will be one single system. There will be nothing such like a EURORDIS or a Euro body to make HTA, because every single country, every single member state is responsible for organizing and funding its own healthcare system. So has the freedom to choose the criteria that are most appropriate according to their own philosophy. So we will not have one single body to perform HTA assessment, but we try to put in everything that we can in common to define common methodological guidelines, to be together, to have also some scientific advice or early dialogue that was mentioned also by Martin, that now you can have also at the level of HTA bodies. And that's something that is changing. So there are, of course, some threats because of the high price of the orphan drugs, generally speaking, per patient, and the financial crisis, and the fact that more and more people, decision makers, look at the price and are a bit reluctant to accept in the healthcare systems drugs that are at a very high price per patient. But there are also the possibility we have to decrease the discrepancies in the assessment and in the conclusion from one member state to the other, between different member states. Yeah. So we are doing a lot for all drugs, and this will be of particular importance for orphan drugs. And maybe I would focus on the point that, that you mentioned, Wills, that is the question how to make the link between the data you have before marketing authorization and the data you are still going to collect after marketing authorization to reduce the uncertainty you always have at the time of the marketing authorization. That's very important because for some orphan drugs, people, decision makers and clinicians have the impression that there is still some uncertainty maybe 10 years after the drug has been authorized. This is not acceptable, and we cannot in the opposite, ask too many data before marketing authorization. So the exact balance between the data we need before marketing authorization And the ones we are going to collect after marketing authorization are one of the most important topics currently in Europe, and there is a lot of work that is being done in this field, and I think that's quite important, and we would like to cooperate also with what happens here on this topic. Sorry.
No, thank you, François. It's perfect. We're right to the point, and thank you, Wills, also for your... So building on that, turning to add, as a person in charge of reimbursement of paying in the Netherlands, but also working with the colleagues across Europe on this payment, what's your perspective on today's situation?
First of all, we have to conclude the orphan disease and drug concept has been a big success. It's clear here in Europe. Having said that, now is the question, how do we keep the concept alive? Which is not going to work if we do nothing, because there are many threats already mentioned, too many or very many, which can be good to patients, but it's difficult for healthcare systems. 1/3 of the orphan drugs are perverse, which means more or less that's not how we meant them to be. It's not illegal, but it's not what we wanted to. They are already mentioned today. Often drugs are getting close to normal drugs nowadays. Many new drugs are also expensive for small indications. So why keep the concept of orphan drugs? There's many no good doctor behavior on dosage, on start and stop criteria, or on the indication, or in outcome research. So if doctors are not going to behave better in this issue, it's a threat. There are no good company behaviors. They do not listen today. There was a lot of communication, a lot of stakeholders, but hardly payers or citizens or healthcare insurance people. So until now, the orphan drug community is very closed. They talk to each other, which is good, of course. They confirm each other, but they do not really realize what's happening outside, and that's a very deep threat for the orphan drug development. Transparency is needed by company. The price is already set. We are not going to pay that prices anymore in near future. The discussions are huge. Citizens, premium payers, they're reaching the borders or what they can or want to pay. So it's not sustainable, the price setting. And then, of course, already mentioned financial crisis, healthcare crisis. If we do nothing, the concept will not survive. So what we have to do is modern legislation, because
Maybe we come to that later on, if you want, because if we say everything at the beginning of the panel, then if we jump to the solutions directly.
Okay, 3 points and I finish. Yeah. Because I do not believe we can talk to industry, so governments have to do that. Industry is too divided. New assessment concepts for reimbursement, and new financial agreements with companies, and new contracts with companies, how we can collaborate between companies and societies and healthcare systems. It's the only solution.
Thank you. So now I propose that we try to share with the audience more about the ongoing initiatives which are being taken, recent initiative, concept, and action in order to improve this market in Europe and address some of the challenges that the three of you have mentioned. So maybe, Wills, would you present first the CAVOMP, the clinical added value of medicinal products, the concept? I know it's a challenge to do that in 90 seconds, but... Okay,
I will try my very hardest. So the CAVOMP is the clinical added value of orphan medicinal products. This is essentially an attempt to address the uncertainty around evidence availability at the time of marketing authorization, and to break the vicious circle that exists. And when I say vicious circle, what happens? You get an orphan drug, you have a very low level of evidence because the disease is rare. So you cannot justify necessarily getting reimbursement. And if you can't get reimbursement, you can't get the product to the patients, so you can't generate the data. So the idea of the clinical added value of orphan drugs is a collaborative effort, so built together with the regulatory authorities, the patients, the industry, and of course the governments, the HTA and the payers. And the idea is basically this. You start with early dialogue, you identify what evidence you have in hand and what evidence you don't have. You identify an evidence generation plan in your third step. So how are you going to gather the evidence? And then at the time of the fourth stage, you would then review this evidence, and that body of evidence would go into the health technology assessment bodies. In other words, a collaborative attempt based on dialogue to reduce the uncertainty in data and to feed the machine of legitimate assessment of whether a drug should be on the reimbursement list or not, but breaking that vicious circle at the time of marketing authorization. Do I win a prize?
Excellent. It's a grade A. François, could you, based on what Will said, elaborate on the current experience, learning curve that you're gaining in the dialogue between EMA and HTA agencies at the time of protocol assistance? But maybe also, I immediately ask you the question, the kind of work that you're doing currently inside the network of HTA agencies in order to develop common methodologies and approach.
Yes, thank you, Yann. That's also an important point, not only to have cooperation between HTA bodies in Europe, but also to have cooperation and dialogue between HTA bodies and the regulatory agencies, so EMA. In the past, it was possible for a company to ask for scientific advice at the level of regulatory agencies, national or the EMA. And so it was possible to have some indication on the type of data you need to get a marketing authorization, to get your drug license. But it doesn't mean that these data that would be judged satisfactory for regulators, for licensing, would satisfy the people in charge of giving advice to the decision makers for pricing and reimbursement, that the HTA bodies. So you may arrive, it was possible to have developed the product for having the marketing authorization, and once the product is licensed, you go to HTA bodies and they are not happy with the data they have, and they consider that other choices should have been made. So that was, of course, quite difficult. And now, one of the things we have developed is to give the possibility to companies to come and see us at an early stage of the development of their product, to discuss a development plan. It can be done either in parallel. At the EMA, at the time you have the scientific advice, you may invite HTA bodies to participate in the meeting and to give their opinion, or to be organized through the EUnetHTA, European Network for Health Technology Assessment Bodies. So that's something really new and I think really important, and that's an opportunity companies should take into account. And then once we have discussed that, we will of course have to look at what sort of data could be useful to collect after the marketing authorization. So I think that progressively we will have a link within the HTA body network, and also by exchanging with the EMA, because EMA can make also requests for post-marketing data collection for safety and for efficacy now. And so we are working together with them. We have a cooperation with the network of pharmacoepidemiology centers in Europe that is called NCEP. It's a big network that is managed by EMA. And they have just created a working group on health technology assessment, because they can collect the data for HTA bodies as well. And there has been a link with EUnetHTA, and I've been elected as the vice chair of this committee, and I think it's important to have all these links between the network of HTA bodies and EMA to improve the quality of the data and the quality of the knowledge we have on the products.
So if I try to summarize what you both said, is the system is still at the national level. This is where the decision is made, where the money is, and it should stay like that, because the money is linked to the criteria which are being used by the member state. But the ongoing movement of collaboration at European level, unable to coordinate around these criteria, unable to have cooperation between the HTA, as you just described, and also to bridge the gap between this national dialogue with HTA, with EMA. At least that's the dynamic in which we're going, which aim to reduce the uncertainties progressively, with an early dialogue, but also to generate dividends which are needed in order to sustain the reimbursement. So, is that an approach that is properly addressing the expectation of the payers in Europe?
Yes, one of them. Collaboration between authorities is good, but I think the main challenge will be collaboration between authorities and companies. If companies are able to change their model, are able to change their attitude to markets and to reimbursement, if companies are able to find new ways of being a partner in healthcare, and they need to find new ways because the old ones doesn't work that good anymore. And I think that's the main issue, and of course that will be on the EU level, that will be on a national level, but it will be very important to find new ways of collaboration, contract, responsibility. As a competent authorities, you cannot rule healthcare. As a company, you cannot, so you need each other, and that's not easy.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. Following up on that, back to Wills. You've been representing industry with others, but being the lead spokesperson in the working group at the European Commission being called Mechanism of Coordinated Access to Orphan Medicinal Products. Could you tell us what's the result after 2 years of discussion? Here too in 90 seconds for our American colleagues.
A second test. I think there are two main outcomes. The first is obviously the actual paper, so the consensus paper that was developed. So the Mechanism of Coordinated Access was a volunteering group of member states' payers, together with stakeholders, so industry, patients, and other groups, with the objective of trying to understand how we could collaborate to increase the possibility of a more harmonized access of real drugs, real treatments for real patients with real diseases. So by collaboration, could we move forward? After 2 years of intensive work, we have the outcome that we have all agreed that a transparent value framework could form the basis on which we could have collaborative discussions between industry, between companies, and with a group of volunteering payers. That's the first outcome. I think that's to be celebrated. I think that's a huge piece in the puzzle and really a huge achievement. The second outcome is not so often referred to, but I think it should not be underestimated. For the past 2 years, industry and the payers and the patients and the HTA authorities have worked together to try and understand each other's challenges. We've shared very openly, sometimes extremely openly, our concerns. And that 2 years of dialogue, I think, has created an understanding and a solid foundation from which we really can go forward, if we want to, as individual companies. It creates the foundation for us really to explore together with the payers how we can have a new relationship and play a new role in sustainable healthcare systems. So the outcomes are the actual products themselves, but also the increased understanding, dialogue, and relationships. So is it the solution? No. Is it a huge building block? I firmly believe yes.
So based on this better mutual understanding and this transparent value framework, which could shape the basis of dialogue between the different European payers with the company, and I understand also bringing the experts, both physicians and patients, into the discussion. Looking at it from the platform of payers in Europe, how you and your colleagues who have participated to shape that solution, how are you looking at it? Do you think, what for you, which potential it has or which challenge it has also?
For us, as we are also civil servants, so we want the best healthcare for the money we have, which is not infinite. So we are looking for ways to get that best healthcare, which is also drugs, and which is sometimes also expensive drugs. So we are ready to pay high prices if the treatment is good. But this kind of collaboration, for us, is that important that we can create partners, not partners in crime, but partners in sustainability of healthcare systems. So we, in the Netherlands, we are very, very sure that as a healthcare system, you need all players. If you don't have that, it's not effective. It doesn't work. We have a lot of experience with that. And these experiments we did is one step on the way to get to a new sustainable healthcare system in Europe, because, again, we have to do something. We cannot do nothing. If we do nothing, we cannot afford it anymore. Even we are rich countries, but even rich countries cannot afford it anymore. So we need this new kind of relations between stakeholders. So that was our main way to go in. And I notice also with other countries, because they are not the same, the Eastern European countries are very, very, very reluctant. They are poor. The southern countries are also getting very, very scared about it. They are poor too.
Yes, although we see better access in Czech Republic and Turkey than we see in some Western Europe countries.
Yes, but Turkey is a booming country. So that's the main track we are on, and we are sure it will take 5, 10, 15 years. We know that, but it's a good way to develop.
So for our friends here in the room, you're saying we're ready to pay high prices if the treatment is good. And also, I think we can say from the 2 years of discussion that there is growing mutual agreement, understanding that it's value-based pricing. But on the other hand, what is being said by AD and the other payers in Europe is that they want to take away some of the abuse or perception of abuse of the system, both at the entry door of the orphan drug designation, but also at the exit at the moment of marketing authorization. And part of the answer, but only part of the answer, is in the proper generation of evidence after marketing authorization in order to sustain the potential for reimbursement, which obviously is based on the reduction of uncertainties.
To add to that, it's not only misuse, it's also inefficiency. So you were at the discussions in the Netherlands on Pompe and Fabry disease, and one of our problems was for some patients it works, for others hardly or less, and that's an inefficiency in the system. So we have to look on more differentiated ways that we pay a lot for some patients where we know, okay, but it's okay, it works. We don't pay a lot for patients where it doesn't work. And that also makes it complicated for us to design that kind of reimbursement schemes, because it's getting very personal then.
Thank you. May I ask you a last round of comment to the three of you in 1 or 2 minutes about what you see next? What is your proposal or potential proposal in order to continue to improve the situation and create this more unique market on orphan drugs? Do you want to start with?
Okay, so first of all, I'm looking forward to the outcomes of the steering committee of the MOCA. So these documents, the transparent value framework, these should, we hope, be adopted by all the government representatives on the 17th of April. This is a very important date. Secondly, I think it's extremely important that we start to actualize the different tools that we're developing. The CAVOMP, if it sits on a piece of paper on its own in a corner over there, will serve no useful purpose. We have the national plans for rare diseases that each European government has committed to create. They've committed to create these by the end of 2013. I'd like to see the countries really taking the elements from the Transparent Value Framework, taking the elements from the EUnetHTA collaboration, taking the concepts of the CAVOMP, and weaving these into the systems that they're building. And the reason why I think this is important is because it will enable the collaboration between the countries that is so important. So to talk about creating start and stop criteria for a given disease, this makes a lot of sense. I think, Yann, you've spoken before, patients don't want to take something that they know doesn't work or doesn't suit them. So how can we create realistic, robust medical guidelines, for example? And the best way, clearly, to do that is on a collaborative basis when we're talking about rare diseases. So I think my concluding thought really is we have seen the government authorities, the payers, the HTA authorities, really coming and engaging with the industry. You've come to speak at our Orphan Drug Task Force. You've met with us in groups, and the door has been open for all of us to go along and talk with you. And I think from an industry perspective, certainly speaking for my company, but also a lot of the colleagues on the Orphan Drug Task Force, we're really committed to going forward and continuing this dialogue to find the solutions together.
If I may, one of the structural elements in the middle of all of that are also the registry and the role of the centers of expertise and European networking to organize that collection of data, right?
Absolutely, and I think I'm conscious of time, but there is a huge number of specific initiatives that are going on in Europe. So the centers of expertise, the registries, these all need to be, say, instrumentalized, they need to be actualized, turned into reality, and used as real tools to help create the expert diagnosis, the expert treatment, the expert care, the gathering of the data via the registries, the sharing of that data, and then the processing of that data to help us understand the right pathway forward. So I think we need to continue making sure that these different pieces of the puzzle all slot together so that we achieve what we really want to achieve, which are these sustainable healthcare systems that Ad spoke about.
Thank you, Will. Ad, please.
A lot of this energy is meant for reducing uncertainties for all stakeholders, including patients. I think we are missing one partner, which is the investors, the money. Part of the investments, of course, come from healthcare systems, but we cannot do without private investors, and reducing uncertainty is very interesting for private investors. So I think we should have a dialogue in that area too. Second, I think that healthcare systems, you can ask from healthcare systems to make clear, okay, what do you want to pay for? What's the unmet needs, the unmet medical needs you want to pay for, you want to pay high prices for, and what do you do not want to pay for? Because it's very a pity for a company to invest and research in ways which at the end we have to say sorry, but that's not
so that's through the early dialogue, right?
And that's the early dialogue one, but it also asks from healthcare system to make clear, okay, where do you want to pay for? And we are not very used to formulate that, so that's another challenge for us.
And that goes somehow with also some of the presentation of Gayatri of this dialogue early on to see what, and it's particularly important when it comes to transferring some preparation from hospital to through the regulatory system or repurposing of drugs, typically that kind of. François, what would be your perspective?
Thank you. Very briefly, I think really we need to make progresses and to continue making progresses at every single step. So we have to be aware that's a huge work ahead. We have to improve the quality of the data that are gathered through the clinical trials. But of course, it starts with the conditions to authorize clinical trials, as was mentioned by Martin. So that's some actors that are responsible of that. How to improve the quality of the data by interacting with EMA, the sponsors for the technology, the companies, patients, health professionals, HTA bodies. we have to put in place the appropriate tools to gather information on the diseases and after on the products and the treatments of the diseases. For instance, registries, you mentioned that, that's very important. There are very different levels of qualities of registries across diseases. We should avoid the product-specific registries. We should have disease-specific registries. There are different levels of qualities across countries. We have to try to agree on the assessment on what is the clinical value and the clinical added value of a drug. So we need really to continue cooperating, exchanging on these affairs. And then there are all these questions related to the price of these products that are quite complicated and for which we really need to make progresses. So I think we have started some work in each of these various steps. So that's very encouraging. But it's a difficult step-by-step approach that we have to continue. There will be a lot of efforts. And with the financial crisis, there is a tendency to retract and to concentrate on the most important task, I mean, for saving money, the budget, and so we should really continue to have these efforts to improve the system. And that will be beneficial for everybody, but there are really a lot of actions. Every single action that has been started in Europe is important for the global success.
Thank you very much, François. And now I hand over to André Singer. Thank you very much to our panelists. Please thank you.
Yeah.